Welcome everybody. I must say I've been keeping an eye on the number of people joining today's session, and it's just wonderful to see just how many of you there are. Again, a big thank you for coming along, and I'm sure it's going to be a really interesting session that we've got for you today. So I won't take up too much of your time. As Dolores said, I work in the support services team. I'm sure for a lot of you, you're quite familiar with what that means and what we do here at Overcome. But just as a quick reminder that as well as running usually roughly monthly webinar sessions such as these with our sort of expert speakers, we run a number of support groups throughout the week, online workshops, which are things like yoga, crafts, and so on, where you can come along to connect with others who are living with ovarian cancer. You can also get in touch with our team by dropping us an email. You can give us a call as well. We're available from Monday to Friday from 10 till 5, just excluding the bank holidays. I'm aware that we've got some of those coming up. So shortly I will put our contact details into the chat box if you want to make a note of those. It doesn't have to be that you get in touch with a question, that you're very welcome to do so. It might be that you'd like some help looking for a particular piece of information. And do you know, more often than not, it's just lovely to hear from people that want to just have a bit of a chat, perhaps to talk things through. And we're absolutely here for that too. It's always wonderful to hear from you. So, as Dolores explained, today's session will be ending at 1, so we're here for the hour, and the Q&A and the chat box functions can be used for your questions or comments. You might want to pop something in there as we go, in case you're worried it might sort of slip your mind as we move through the session. But we will be coming to all questions at the end of the session today. It is possible that we may run out of time. As we say, there's lots of people on the call today. So if we don't have time for all of the questions to put to Rachel, she's very kindly said that she's happy to take some of those from us. So what we can do is collate any that haven't been asked, put them to Rachel via email, and then we will get a response to you, which I'm sure you'll agree is very generous. The most important thing with questions in our webinars is that it's really important essentially that your question isn't too personal, and it's not just something that applies to your very kind of personal and specific situation. Try to think about kind of the general audience and things that might be of interest to the group as a whole. And we will run through those with Rachel at the end, as I say. So without further ado, just to introduce Rachel properly to you, I'm sure she's a familiar face to some of our members, but Rachel White is a registered clinical and sports dietitian. She works part-time in the NHS as a specialist oncology dietitian, supporting patients from their diagnosis to living with and beyond cancer. Outside of the NHS, Rachel runs her own business, Rachel White Nutrition, providing specialist support to athletes to optimise their sporting performance through nutrition. We're really grateful as well, very grateful that Rachel is on our Overcome Expert Advisory panel, meaning that she's one of a number of experts to whom we go to looking for kind of specialist knowledge, really, particularly when our own support team might have a question that we don't know the answer to. We do have, these experts, including Rachel, who very generously give their time to support us in that way. Some of you might recognise Rachel from our recent event in Bath, which was at the end of last year, and we're really pleased that she'll be joining us again in Cardiff in August. So do keep your eye on our website, and then you'll be able to come and see Rachel in person if that's fairly local to you. She's also held a number of webinars from us in the past. If you'd like to kind of have a look at where those are, open up our Overcome YouTube channel, and they're all stored on there, so you can have a look back through what Rachel's done with us previously, as well as our other speakers as well. Okay, tried to get through that as quickly as I could so as not to take too much time. So, Rachel, I will pass to you. Thank you.
Fabulous. Thanks, guys. Right, let's see. I will share my slides. And let me make that full size. Is that all good for everyone? You can see those nicely. Perfect. So, yeah, thanks very much, everybody, for coming along. I guess today is a bit of an overview, and if you did come and see me in Bath, sorry, you might hear a bit of repetition here, but it's always good to hear the same things again sometimes. But today is more about looking at kind of diagnosing cancers and kind of what should we be doing. So just a little brief introduction. We'll go through a few different ones, supplements, actually what can you do additionally, and where to get support. So I won't labour on this, but because thank you, Alice, for all the introductions. But I guess one thing I wanted to do here is just I'm a specialist oncology dietitian, so I'm registered with the Healthcare Professions Council. And what that means is, as a registered healthcare professional, if I stand up here today and tell you to take X or Y, and that's going to take, help with your cancer or risk of recurrence or anything, and that isn't what the research says, I can get struck off. So hopefully what this does is reassure you that actually what I'm saying is where the evidence is at, and is where we're at from a research perspective. I've worked extensively in oncology for, my gosh, a few too many years now, probably like 6 7 years, across lots of different cancer types, but been strongly linked with Overcome for quite a few years now, alongside my sports work and other private bits and bobs. So I suppose it's kind of important to first start up, because I know everyone's going to be in different places in terms of your journeys, in terms of where you're at. Are you supporting someone? Are you kind of just being diagnosed mid-treatment, living with and beyond? Everyone is quite difficult, and I think it's really important to just highlight that actually treatment can be really difficult, and there's lots of different ways it can impact someone nutritionally. And I don't want to focus on this too much because I want to go more into the diet myths today. But I think it's really important to recognize that there is loads of potential side effects from treatment, and things like feeling full, is something common we find in the ovarian cancer kind of cohort, or changes in bowel habits, loss of appetite, nausea and vomiting. And actually these things can happen, and some people have one, and some people unfortunately tick every single box in that list. And that can have quite a lot of implications from a nutritional perspective. So decreasing appetite, not able to get food in, you've got increased losses if you're kind of vomiting, we've got lots of diarrhea. It's a difficulty preparing food because you feel absolutely knackered as a result of your treatment. And there's lots of different ways we can focus on that. And there's always a bit of a balance between the dietary and medical management. And that's why it works best when everyone works together, which is why we kind of work as a team. You don't just have one person looking after your care, there's everyone that gets involved. And medications are fantastic, but there's lots of different ways that we can focus on things from a dietary management perspective. So some of the food first advice, and some different snacks and meal ideas, or nutritional supplements, which may be something you guys have tried or not. I'm sure you've got very strong opinions if you have, because they tend to be a bit Marmite love or hate. But what I wanted to focus on is that there's lots of reasons why it can be quite difficult, and your nutrition may not be optimal. And what I would do is I would, encourage you to seek that support. Generally, most centres will have dietitians. We're quite short in supply. Sometimes they can be quite long waiting lists. I do appreciate, there's lots of support and things available, but it's thinking actually, am I struggling with some of these? Some of the advice and some things that you may hear may not necessarily be relevant for you at that time. So it's quite common to have these issues. Some people don't have any, which is fantastic, but unfortunately, lots of you may have experienced or may know someone that has struggled, during your treatment or kind of around your treatment time. So what I really wanted to focus on today was the diet, myths and cancer side of things. Now, this is always a popular topic, and it's something, there's things that go round in different times as to being the latest, most kind of the latest thing we discuss, something we're not so bothered about anymore. And so I've picked out a few. There's more, and there certainly is others. And to say, have a bit of time for questions, or I can, answer later on. But we're going to go through some of the common ones. So sugar, soy, and dairy are the key kind of three that I hear most, and then talk about supplements supplements as well, because that's another very common topic, which I think is can be pretty confusing. Superfoods, and then ultra processed foods as well. The kind of the new buzz thing of shouldn't we be eating them? What can we do? What's the best thing? So I will go through each of them and kind of have a little bit of a discussion. And I think it is important to kind of put this, there is no one size totally fits all approach to all of these things, but this is the research that underpins. And I know it's can be quite a confusing space, even as a professional in it. I sometimes get totally overwhelmed, and like, oh, I don't know, is that something new? Is that something I don't know? So first of all, sugar and cancer. Now, this is probably one of the most common questions I get asked. I'd say on a weekly basis, I have someone asking me about this. And I'll kind of separate them into kind of claim and fact. So the idea behind this is that your cancer cells use sugar. So glucose is the molecule that is sugar, and they use them for growth. Therefore, and they're known as kind of sugar hungry, so they use a lot of energy. So therefore, the idea is if we take away that energy source for those cells, then it won't be able to grow. So seems kind of fairly simple, but unfortunately, it's a lot more difficult, and there's quite a lot of physiological processes that go on in our body. Our bodies are absolutely mind-blowing. They can do so many great things, and like what happens in our body when we eat something or do anything, quite frankly, is totally like ridiculous, really. There's so many little processes and physiological things that do, and chemical reactions and all sorts. And unfortunately, what this means is that actually just cutting out sugar doesn't end up restricting the cancer cells. Cancer cells are incredibly adaptable, and they can utilize other sources of energy. What this also does mean is that also all our healthy cells, so all the cells that make up everything else in our body, are also then restricted from their energy source as well. So you're not just making it difficult for the cancer cells that have to be then super resourceful, you're making it difficult for your body as a whole. So then can be a bit more difficult to get that energy that you need. Now, sugar, when we think of sugar, and as I've put in the picture on the slide, is a sugar cube. But actually, glucose is found in lots of different things. So glucose in is the finest form, but then you've got fructose, which is a bit more of a complex sugar, but that gets broken down into glucose in the body, and fructose is what we find in fruit, for example. And there's lots of different more kind of complex versions of sugar where there's lots of different molecules joined together that then get broken down into that sugar molecule by your body. So actually, when we talk about, we just remove sugar, we're not actually just talking about taking the sweets, biscuits, chocolate out of our diet. We would have to get rid of all of, a lot of the complex carbohydrates. So things like your breads, rice, pastas, all of those, your fruits, your smoothies. Actually, it's a huge, huge amount of our diet, and actually quite unsustainable to do that from just a practical perspective. But then also we end up, limiting loads of really healthy foods that are in our diet. And they can also have, these foods, for example, a fruit, it's difficult to compare a fruit and a biscuit, whereas actually in our body, by the time they're broken down, they equal glucose molecules. But when we eat that piece of fruit, we also get some vitamins and minerals, we get some fiber and things. So it's a little bit more complex, I guess, is what I'm trying to get at. And actually eating foods that are high in fiber and vitamins and minerals, there is evidence that can help to reduce your risk of cancer. So it's not kind of putting a bit of a blanket rule, it's thinking a little bit more perhaps in depth where you can. That being said, it is recommended, if your appetite is good and you are eating well, to reduce the excessive sugars in our diet. So those kind of we kind of call them free sugars or simple sugars. And these are things like in sugary drinks or some of the sweeties and things. If you're eating well and your appetite is good, then yeah, absolutely, as part of a healthy, balanced diet, would say, perhaps be mindful of the amount that you're having. But as some of you may know, and something I spend my life telling people, sometimes if your appetite isn't good and actually you really fancy those biscuits and that's what you can manage, that is absolutely fine as a short-term solution. So I guess the main underlying thing is I know there's a lot of information out there, about this. And yes, cancer cells do use sugar for energy, but our body is incredibly resourceful. Unfortunately, cancer cells are blooming good at what they do, which is why it can be quite difficult to get rid of them because they're quite resilient and very adaptable. So it's not as simple. And also sometimes the harm that you can do to your kind of body as a whole and your energy levels by restricting that food can sometimes, outweigh some of the benefits. I mean, there is some great, and there's some, if people are very interested, there's a lot more kind of in-depth, in-depth research who can, to explain that a little bit more in depth if that's something that would be helpful and you would find useful. So kind of ultimately, we don't need to avoid sugar. So next on to soy. Now, this is another big one, especially kind of ovarian cancer and some of the other kind of hormone sensitive cancers. This is one that comes up a lot more regularly. So the reason why everyone kind of soy gets a lot of headlines is that isoflavones, which are found in soy products, have a similar chemical structure, to the hormone estrogen. And as you know, some cancers can be estrogen receptive, so they can stimulate. So it was thought that if you eat the foods, then you're only going to further stimulate your cancer. But actually, it has been found, and current evidence does recommend that it is safe to have the isoflavone foods, so soy. So soy foods include things like edamame beans or soybeans, kind of soy drinks, some of the meat alternatives, for example, some of the more common soy foods that you might have. But actually, there has been evidence that, with especially in areas where soy consumption is quite high in their general diet, that actually there's been a lower risk of overall cancer occurrence. So they may even, in fact, be protective. And these foods can be used as part of a healthy, balanced diet, and they, non-meat wise, good source of protein, also a bit of fiber. But where we don't have the evidence is it's certainly not evidence to say soy supplement. So what we'd always advise is if you like, having these things, these types of foods, include them as part of your day. But you don't need to actually add in or have extra. We don't have the evidence to say that larger amounts is actually going to be super protective. It's more just adding it as part of your eating, to make it as balanced as possible. So next on to dairy. So there's a lot out there in terms of the thoughts that the hormones used in the production of milk, they can promote hormone-related cancerous kind of tumor growth, so they can make your cancers grow. Now, one of the big things here, and this is just something to keep in the back of your mind, is a lot of this and a lot of the kind of noise around dairy and cancer comes from America. Now, in America, they have incredibly different practices in terms of their dairy production and what they use to what we have in the UK and EU. So a lot of the things, not that the claim is still upheld in America, but a lot of the reasons and the kind of arguments and for and against is actually very much kind of not hugely applicable to here us kind of in the UK. I know we're not part of the EU, but we use very similar regulations to the UK and EU. And there is actually no evidence here at all to say that it's going to cause a risk of growth because of the hormones. And actually, dairy can be a great source of calcium and protein. But, if dairy is not your thing, and I appreciate there can be concerns about dairy from a number of things, whether that be sustainability or actually you just prefer to be more kind of plant-based, then using alternatives is great. The number one thing I'd say with an alternative is make sure they're fortified with calcium. Now, the non-dairy kind of alternative milks, I can't get my head around how many there are these days. I go in and there's another whole lot and whole nother kind of company on the shelves. A lot of the ones in the supermarket will be fortified, and it's just worth checking. So it should say on the front, fortified with calcium, or in the back quite obviously. And that's the main thing, because dairy is such a big part of our calcium intake, and especially for women and postmenopausal women, calcium requirements are pretty high. And actually, if you're not having any dairy for whatever reason that might be, your calcium intake is going to be one of the biggest, quite a big concern or potential gap in your diet. So just have a quick check generally these days a lot of them are, it tends to be more if you go to say like a local farm shop, or kind of get a slightly more alternative, or kind of generally actually the really expensive products are the ones that aren't fortified, ironically. But that would just be one thing just to double check. In terms of kind of to think from a health perspective, if you are eating well and you've got a good appetite and you're wanting to kind of promote kind of that from a living kind of with and beyond cancer side of things, then we would recommend the lower fat dairy from a health perspective. So choosing the skimmed or semi-skimmed, for example, milks can be an option. So it's just being mindful from that side. But then again, actually, if you're looking to boost up your intake, there's nothing better than a bit of full fat, full fat milk, or even the gold top's often a bit of a winner, and something to try. So there really, this one there really is very much not, the claims really aren't substantiated for this, and especially kind of coming predominantly from the US. Now, dietary supplements. Now, this is a big area, and you could probably do an entire talk on different supplements, to be honest. But it's an area that's it is quite can be quite difficult, and I guess there is kind of some nuances around here. So there's often a lot of claims that lots of alternative medicines can increase survival, reduce recurrence, optimize your treatment, boost your immune system, for example. And the whole COVID years, I think immunity became such a bit of a buzzword, I would say. Everyone was suddenly very concerned about their immunity, which kind of extended beyond the kind of medical side of things. And a lot of supplements popped up. And I know, if you're going through treatment, there's always worry that your cell counts, your white cells are going to go, and your immune system is going to be lower. So looking for any ways to boost that, sounds like a great option. The issue we have with supplements is that I guess there's two ways to look at it. And I suppose as a dietitian, this is the kind of the two things. First of all, is please always let your teams know what you're taking. Generally, I have found that people don't want to say because they're worried they're going to tell them to stop. And my view very much is there's kind of two levels to it. Is it going to be harmful? And if there isn't necessarily going to be that harm benefit, but you feel like it's helpful or you would like to continue, then generally that's fine. I guess the next level is it helpful? And that's often where there's perhaps can sometimes see, as the practitioner versus the kind of the patient or the client, can see some differences. And I guess and that's why we want to make sure that the team knows, because actually if there are things that are going to make things more difficult from your treatment wise, so some do interfere with cancer drugs, so some of the really high dose antioxidants, I listed a few there, but may affect how well your chemo works. And what we definitely don't want to happen, and I'm sure you would agree you don't want to either, is you're going through this treatment. We don't want anything to make it more difficult or be less effective than it has to be. So it is just highlighting that. The number one exception, and my favourite, and actually I'm probably going to pipe down about it for a few months, is vitamin D, because basically if every adult in the UK should be on vitamin D supplements throughout the winter months. That's because we get vitamin D predominantly from the sunshine. Now, as you well know, and ironically, it's actually been beautiful. But ironically, we don't get a huge amount of sunshine. And in the winter months, the sun isn't strong enough for our bodies to synthesize vitamin D from it. So during the winter months, even if it's a beautiful sunny day here, we can't get enough vitamin D. And that's between the months of October to April. So we're just now tipping into when the sun is actually strong enough to kind of do something useful. And now in the summer months, you need to be outside 3 times a week between the hours of 10 and 2 for 20 minutes with your arms and face exposed in the sunshine. Now, I don't know how busy your lives are. I'm not quite sure where you live, but here I'm based in Bristol, and I can tell you it is a rarity that it is sunny 3 times in a week between the hours of 10 and 12, when I also have a chance to be outside for 20 minutes and have my arms and face exposed with no suntan lotion on for those 20 minutes only. Obviously put it on afterwards. So it's really difficult to get sufficient vitamin D, is what I'm trying to get at. And so therefore we recommend that supplementation across the winter. And then if you're not getting much exposure, and I know lots of people will be told to not do as well over the winter months, is actually you might need it additionally year round. Vitamin D also works alongside calcium. So if you have been told, to take, calcium tablets or anything, certainly from a bone perspective, then it's likely vitamin D will help with that from an absorption perspective. Now, if you are struggling to eat and you don't think, or you're not getting the variety in, whether that be for different reasons, actually a multivitamin might do the trick. And there's some standard ones. So generally we'd recommend something called an A to Z multivitamin. You'll see them in supermarkets and pharmacies. They're quite cheap. Nothing too expensive, or actually you can get them prescribed through your medical team. But that can be a good way to kind of tick all in one without having to take lots of different ones. And what can happen when you take lots of different supplements is actually sometimes things double up and you can end up taking a large amount. Now, sometimes that isn't dangerous. Sometimes we just wee it out. And quite frankly, it's not really worth paying lots of money to wee something out, in my view. But there are the occasional ones where it can be quite dangerous. So I think there's a twofold approach here. Is please make sure you let your team know if you're taking anything. Now, there are people called medicines information pharmacists, so the pharmacy teams can look in to see if there's any interactions. It's going to give you a bit of evidence base, and I've utilized them quite extensively in the past when people have been taking a number of different things, and often we found a balance. And I've had, patients in the past who are taking 10, 15 different types of supplements. And generally some of them are fine, but some of the more herbs and things can be very much not. And so it's finding those ones. And actually we've settled on a bit of a halfway house. So I go, right, these are the ones that we really want you to stop. But these are the ones I can't sit here and recommend you have them. But if you want to take them, then that's okay. And it's finding that middle ground. I think hopefully you won't have practitioners or kind of deal with people that just say an absolute downright no, and there's no further discussion. Sometimes people are a little bold on that, but it is finding that. And yeah, there are sometimes some benefits to taking things, but I think it's thinking why you're taking it. Do you feel better for having taken that a certain supplement? And just thinking, is it dangerous? So I had someone the other day that was taking apricot kernels because she'd read that was really helpful. Now, apricot kernels contain cyanide. And I probably don't have to tell you, probably don't know much about cyanide, but it's bad. It's a poison. People get killed by cyanide poisoning. Now, that may seem, they say it's only a very low dose, but what we don't want to do is that's increasing her risk of getting poisoned, and kind of that is not very helpful in lots of different ways, and unfortunately doesn't have any benefit from a cancer perspective. So, that was a straight up, absolutely, this is not what we would recommend. I obviously can't stop her from taking it, but it's very much what we would say. So, it is something that there is lots of information around there. There is a couple of good websites and things that healthcare professionals can look at to have a look and to kind of support you with that as well. But it's always worth asking and just making sure. And actually, the team may be like, no, that's all cool, don't worry about it, or keep this one, don't do that one. Plus, another thing is they can be incredibly expensive. And when people are often taking lots of different ones, I say, why not just get that one A to Z multivitamin, and then you take one tablet rather than 15 when you're probably already taking a lot more, and it's a lot cheaper. And my last thing before I move on is with the vitamin D, you really don't need to get the expensive ones. The own brand is just as good. Because basically, especially when it's a single supplement by itself, basically what you're paying for is a nicer bottle and a better labeling. You may like a nice bottle to put on your side, and that's absolutely fine. But if that doesn't worry you, please go for the cheaper one, because you're probably getting the same tablet inside of two of the ones. So next up, another fave topic of mine, the old superfoods. Now, first of all, it's important to note actually what is a superfood. So apparently a superfood, as defined by the Oxford Dictionary, is a nutrient-rich food considered to be especially beneficial for health and well-being. Now, what this is, is they're foods that are meant to be helping with health and prevent diseases. So they pop up in lots of different kind of ways, and related to lots of different things. There is, it is true that eating such as superfoods and these healthier foods can help reduce the risk of cancer. We know that following a healthy, balanced diet is really important. But what we do also know is there's no single foods that can do that as well. Now, the word superfood is actually a marketing term. So it was developed by marketeers as a way to brand their different foods or items and things, rather than something that comes from more the scientific community as a kind of the definition. Now, it is actually banned from using on packaging. So you won't see, I don't know, you buy your smoothie, for example, it can't tell you it's a superfood smoothie because it's not, because that is misleading, because it doesn't have that evidence. So it is probably got a little bit better that the food industry now can't use these things. But it doesn't stop, especially a lot of alternative practitioners using the word superfood to kind of lure perhaps you in, and make you think, oh, I must do this because it's a superfood, or that might be a great supplement because it's got, lots of blueberry extract or whatever it might have in it. So therefore that must be good. And I'm not saying, the superfoods aren't bad. They're just not as super as the name suggests. So it's just thinking, actually, what is this? What are they saying this product is doing? Yes, it probably is quite good for you, but is it going to have this, wonderful, even more benefits than it might need? Now, ultra processed. And I know this slide is a bit busy, but I couldn't think of any other way to actually cut it down without having the information on there. Ultra processed foods is something I wanted to add in because it is everywhere at the moment. Should we be having them? Should we not? How do we cut them down? It's something that is quite a difficult thing. And actually, I've just written, which I think will be in the next magazine, an article on ultra processed foods because we thought it was quite an important thing to address in a bit more detail. So I'm just really trying to remember what I've written in that article, but you can get the next magazine and find out for yourselves. But it is based on something called the NOVA classification. Now, this was a classification that was developed by a group of South American scientists. So it was used very much more, well, it was developed for thinking about food as a kind of from a population level rather than labeling individual foods. But there's 4 levels. So you've got unprocessed or minimally processed foods. So that's your first level. So you just get your fruits, vegetables, nuts, seeds. Level 2 is processed ingredients. So you've got foods that are added rather than eaten themselves. So your salts, sugars, and oils. You then go to processed foods. So these are foods combining the first 2. So jams, pickled, tinned fruits, some of your breads and cheeses. And then we go to the level 4, which is the ultra processed foods, the UPFs. These tend to have ingredients that you might not have found. Things like additives, preservatives, sweeteners, colorings, and things to make them into the products they are. They generally have longer shelf lives, and that can be because of the preservatives and additional things added in. So this is the system of which ultra processed foods have been categorized into. And remember what I've said is that system is well known there's limitations. Yes, there hasn't been anything better. Let's not forget that. But it's not really designed to say, right, this crumpet, what is it? Where does that fit in? So what do we need to think about them? Because it is hard, and I think it's important to not think about it as a one size fits all. I think there's pros and cons to ultra processed foods. As I've just mentioned, the classification system isn't perfect. Think about getting that 80-20 rule. So if you are eating well, 80% of your food to come from whole foods, but then actually the 20% to come from foods and things you enjoy, and that may include ultra processed foods. It's about reducing, it's not eliminating. It's nigh on impossible, really, to totally avoid, or just often isn't very practical. It can come with huge expense to totally avoid any ultra processed foods, which, you may have the finance to do that or want all the time, but it can become very time consuming and difficult and quite confusing. So I put a picture of Weetabix up there because that is considered an ultra processed food. Now I eat Weetabix every day and I have done for probably like the last 25 years. It is, I appreciate, an exceptionally boring breakfast cereal, and I just have it with plain milk and I absolutely love it. But as you know, the recent UPF's kind of thing exploded, I saw, I think there was a Times or Telegraph article on it being basically solely on Weetabix, because Weetabix is classed as an ultra processed food because it's had barley malt added in. So is that the worst thing that could be added in? I would say no. You know, does that mean I should be definitely avoiding that? Some people might say yes, but actually, do you know what? It doesn't necessarily mean that food is bad because it's not ultra processed. There is a bit more nuance to it. And that's why the classification system isn't perfect. You know, Weetabix is a great source of fiber. You know, it's actually, you know, it's quite low in free sugars and things like that. So actually it's quite a good balanced option to choose. It just does have things added in to make it into it. And I think we're also got to make sure is, you know, remember is that, you know, additives and stuff sometimes are really useful and we do need them. You know, it's why we've been able to have such a expanded different foods available. So don't forget, sometimes they can be quite beneficial and make life a bit easier. But you know, actually reducing it down is certainly not going to be any harmful thing if you're eating as good. So perhaps having a little rethink of your meal times. Think about some easy wins. Are there ways to add in, you know, or switch up to, you know, not using that packet sauce, but making it from scratch, or adding in, you know, and getting that balance. You know, actually, if you're having ready meals, put a fresh side, you know, get some fresh vegetables to get that balance in there. Meal kits can be a great option. So there's a few, for example, things like Hello Fresh or Gusto. There are lots of other ones actually out there. They can be a great way to actually, you know, still get the convenience and the ease of having that, but choosing perhaps a bit more of a balanced one than perhaps some of the classic ready meals you might get at the supermarket, if that's something you'd like to do. And then batch cooking as well as another way to make, perhaps if you don't want to rely on perhaps some of these other foods, as a way to do that. Now, bread's taken a bit of a hammering from the UPF kind of thing. And yes, you can make your own. Absolutely, you know, please do. Goodness, I would love to make my own bread all the time, but quite frankly, I just don't have the time. You know, wouldn't it be lovely? I'd love to wake up to the fresh smell of bread, you know, float. If I could do that, if I could have it smelling nicely from my kitchen so I could have it for lunch after this, it'd just be dreamy. But sadly, you know, life is often a little too short and not enough time to make your own bread. But thinking, can I choose the freshly made stuff at the supermarket? Where possible, you know, thinking about whole grains for that extra fiber. But sometimes, do you know what? A loaf of sliced bread in the freezer for when you need it does the trick. It's really helpful, it's convenient, and it's quite cheap. So I think it's thinking about time and place. You know, that can be a way that you can have less, but not totally unrelying. You know, yes, I will try and have more fresh bread, but actually I'll always have that backup, you know, sliced bread in the freezer for when I don't have anything. And then it's looking at the labels. So is there a lot of ingredients that you wouldn't necessarily find you don't understand? Maybe that's a sign of something to be a bit more mindful of. But bear in mind, and I can't remember what it is. I think, is it hummus? Often has ascorbic acid in it as a bit of a stabilizer. So ascorbic acid is vitamin C, and it's kind of a scientific term. So that labels it then as an ultra processed food, but actually is having some vitamin C added into your hummus a bad thing? Probably not. So it's often sometimes not as easy just to say, look at the label, because you need to have that understanding and knowledge. But those are a few things. So I think it is great if you're eating well and you can. Absolutely minimizing the use of some of the ultra processed foods is recommended for a healthy balanced diet. And they, you know, excessive use of eating of ultra processed foods has been linked to some of the more chronic diseases, but sometimes it's inevitable and we do need to, you know, use them. In terms of specifically with cancer as well, I would say there isn't because there hasn't really been any specific evidence, specifically related to either just going through your treatment or not. So we don't have anything that we can say 100% for that. But if you're eating well, reduce. If not, then don't worry yourself too much. This is a short-term change to get you through your treatment. So just to kind of round off a couple of last things is what I think is important is having those tools to think when you see something, how do I know whether I should be following it or not? And I think first up is thinking, is it credible or is it a myth? Check the source. Where are you finding this from? Is it from your mate's sister's brother-in-law, who then has told you that apparently Joan really benefited from? Do they know where have they got that information from? Is it from online? Is it from an Instagram reel, for example, or has it come from a newspaper that then refers to something? Are they referring to evidence? Now, I would say if someone's really spout something like you must take this, I want to know where that scientific paper has come from. If they can't come back to you with that scientific paper, I would be going, I wonder where this comes from. And then the main thing is are you being sold it? Now, I know lots of people have got to make money in this world, but when someone comes along and it's all quite nice, and then suddenly, boom, you need to spend £40 a month on this, that makes me skeptical, and perhaps I'm a bit of a skeptic in general. But just thinking, is there something in that for them? You buying that product, is that financing them? Are they selling a business, or are they doing this because they've got your best interest at heart? And then thinking, is the diet balanced with a lot of things? And you may think, oh, she's a bit boring. She sat on the fence with lots of things and not too much. Actually, do you know what? That's where the evidence is that healthy, balanced diet. We don't recommend cutting out big food groups because we know there isn't the evidence to support that. Actually, is what they're saying going to be very limiting? Is it going to be really difficult for you? Is it going to cut out foods that you enjoy? And thinking, if that's the case, then I would be having that critical lens. So it's just taking that stock moment, because I know the headlines are always really inviting, and you go, oh, I wonder if I should be doing, this or that. But actually just take that moment to step back and think. So I won't go into this too much time because I want to leave some time for questions, but thinking about, what can you do to improve your balance? As I said, it is down to the healthy balance. And I know this is boring. It's nothing too jazzy and exciting, but this is what is recommended. And the important thing at the bottom is having foods that you enjoy. Don't forget that. Food is there for enjoyment, sharing, opportunities. Birthday cake. Don't not have that piece of cake on your birthday because you feel like it's not as balanced as it can be. You're perhaps not eating, well, maybe you are eating your entire birthday cake, and I would be right behind you if you did. But you're not eating that birthday cake all day, every day, and that's the main thing. So the World Cancer Research Fund is somewhere I would recommend going and having a look. They've got cancer prevention and recurrence recommendations. These are their top 10. They'll align hopefully with everything I've just said as well. But there's lots of information kind of on their website to have a look and follow for as well. So where can you get resources from? I would say just think who you're getting the information from. So World Cancer Research Fund I've just mentioned, Macmillan probably likely involved in your trusts, through your cancer teams. The British Dietetic Association, dietitians, we're qualified, registered, healthcare professionals to overcome. Obviously, we've got the support line, and things and questions we passed on to myself or others to get that support, the NHS. If you see something, you're like, oh, I wonder if, and then you go and have a look, say on Macmillan's website, Overcome, and you can't see the same thing being, said, then perhaps have that critical lens. If genuinely there was that one supplement that was going to be that revolutionary for your cancer care, we would be recommending it if it had the evidence. Trust me, we're not hiding things from you. If there is the evidence, we certainly would be. And then just the last thing to finish off is I think it's really important to recommend you all individuals. Everyone is different. We have different needs, tastes, preferences, and recommendations. Nutrition isn't a one size fits all. Because something worked well for somebody at some stage, or they found that supplement, or they found this is really good, doesn't mean it's necessarily going to be the same for you. So just take that moment to have a think. And, hopefully I haven't been too negative on things. And it's more just to reassure you that actually, you can eat those different things if you want to, and find what works for you. Just because you really enjoy that and someone else doesn't mean they're wrong or you're wrong, or they're right. So yeah, hopefully a few things to think about. I can see there's been a few questions in the chat already, so hopefully we've got time to answer a few of them. But hopefully that has been helpful and given you a bit of food for thought as well.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Rachel. What a fantastic presentation. I've seen Rachel speak a few times now, but every time I come away with something else that I've learned or something to think about. Thank you so much, Rachel, again, for really generously, giving your time today and putting that together. I'm sure our attendees will agree that was really comprehensive, but also really clear advice as well. So yes, we have had quite a few questions come in. So let me pick out a couple to get us started. So we've had a question around, where should we start? With the vitamin D supplements that you said are really important for us. How much vitamin D is the recommended daily dose?
Oh, yes, sorry, I didn't say that. So the general recommendation is 10 micrograms a day. So that's 400 international units across the winter months. And that is a kind of government recommendation. That is based on, it's often quite difficult to get your vitamin D levels checked. They will quite tend to do them some point along your kind of cancer journey, but it's basically assumed everyone's deficient because where we live and kind of the difficulties I was mentioning. So that 10 micrograms should be enough to keep things topped up. However, if you have had your blood levels checked and they are low, then you are likely to go on a higher dose. Or if you are on some kind of bone protection kind of medication, it might be a lot higher dose. But if you've been told nothing else, I would say the 10 micrograms or 400 international units is a good place to start. It can be, and often they do get sold in 25 micrograms. So gosh, I can't work out what the equivalent international units are. My maths is not quick enough. 400 like 1,000 international units. That's generally not something we would say is terrible, but you don't need to go like bigger is not necessarily better. As the same with lots of them. So yeah, that would be the recommendation.
Brilliant, thank you. And I suppose along similar lines of supplements, somebody has asked, is there a way of knowing which supplements actually contain what they claim they do? I.e., are there reputable companies that have safe products and quality ingredients? Is it the case that hopefully every supplement pot on the shelf, is doing what it claims to do? If you've got any thoughts on that?
Yeah, that's a really good question. So I work in the sports work I do, we have lots of problems with this. You probably hear about, sports people getting done for doping, which is taking kind of illegal substances. And they have a system, they've got something called informed sport. I won't go into it, but that's where everything is batch checked because lots of, sports supplements, they sneak some little bonus extras in there, which is something we don't want. And in terms of the general supplement industry, I am not 100% sure which ones are checked, if I'm honest. I would say probably to be on the safer side, a way to kind of go around that is to go into a pharmacy because the ones they will stock will be from more reputable brands. I think where things can go a little woolly is probably some of the online sales side of things. I don't know if there are websites, and I don't know if pharmacists would probably be the most useful person, to back to give a little bit more in depth. But I would say go into your pharmacy. We totally underutilize pharmacists. They are a wealth of knowledge, and they will tell you what not do. And that can always be a good first protocol if you don't, or you're not seeing your team for a while or you don't know. I would say go in, say, right, I'm taking this and this. Oh, I'm looking for vitamin D. I'm on this medication. Is there anything you recommend? And they'll be able to advise. So I would say if it's something, I guess the internet can be a little a little rogue at times. But yeah, that's a really good question. And I don't know if there is I'm sure there probably is some databases, like there is from the sports side of things. I'm just not aware actually.
Yeah, no, thanks for that, Rachel. A question that I know I've kind of thought about myself, it's something that's probably of interest to many, is what about artificial sweeteners? Are we better eating sugar?
Mm. Sweetness one's always an interesting balance. Now, I guess we're still quite early days in the sweetener world. It feels like they've been around for a while, but in order to get that long-term data, we need things to be around for a while to know actually is what we ate 10 years ago impacting our health now. And so I think it depends which way you're looking at it. From, say, if you were saying, I would like to lose weight and, I want to improve things, actually switching to for example, the diet versions of the fizzy drink products can be quite a good way to reduce down your overall sugar intake and therefore be a healthier option. But it is adding something in. It then does make it an ultra processed food. There is more processing involved and additional things added in. I think it's often what I like to see, perhaps moving to those as a stepping stone of actually, is that a way to kind of reduce down your kind of reliance on fizzy drinks or your kind of enjoyment as part of the diet? But sometimes actually, do you know what? There's nothing like a can of Coke to sometimes just beautifully hit the spot. I do a lot of running, and when I need that energy, sometimes there's nothing better than that burst of energy. But that's used in a specific situation. So where the research is at, as far as I'm aware, we're not quite there in terms of saying absolutely not to have. I think the benefits of reducing down our overall kind of free sugar intake is beneficial. And there's also lots of different types of sweeteners as well. So it's quite hard to kind of put them all under one. So I'd say it is a bit of a watch this space. It may be something that in a few years' time we're a little bit more hesitant to recommend. But at the moment, I would say certainly if you're looking to kind of get a bit more balance and kind of healthy, balanced lifestyle side, then actually it's not something that's too I would say is fine to add into your diet, but you can look at different ways that perhaps you wouldn't necessarily involve them all the time.
Mm, brilliant, thank you. We've had a couple of questions relating to things like antioxidants, so greens, ginger, turmeric. Somebody's asking, are they proven to reduce or cure cancer? Somebody else is asking about turmeric specifically. Is it bad for ovarian cancer?
Yeah, so the kind of the kind of antioxidant side of things, there certainly is, potentially some benefits. Now, one thing I would say is absolutely including those foods as part of the diet if you like them. And I think that's where it is that the benefits aren't going to outweigh the kind of the difficulty or the kind of unenjoyment of your food as a result. But yeah, a lot of them, there certainly are benefits. In terms of the strength of the benefits from a cancer perspective, it is unlikely. What we do know is that eating, some of the foods that are higher in the antioxidants and things is unlikely to be sufficient to be able to to be that positive. But things like turmeric, so that has curcumin in that's its active ingredient. It's fat soluble. So what we say with turmeric is actually there's lots of supplements and things out there, but it's better absorbed as part of the meal. So why not add it into your cooking where you can? So you're actually still getting them, but they're within the safe amount. As I mentioned on the supplement slide, some of those really high dose can affect chemotherapy. So we would recommend just including it in from a dietary perspective. It's not going to be, the evidence isn't there to state it's going to be sufficient enough to kind of stop the cancer. But it's absolutely generally the foods are not things that are bad and they're only going to be necessarily helpful. But don't feel like you have to rush out and go and buy, the blueberries, the different berries, the ginger. But if you enjoy them and you like them, absolutely go for gold.
Well, Thanks, Rachel. I think we might have time for one more question. And as I said at the start, what we will do, I think pretty much all of the questions actually are quite general, which is great. So thank you for that, everybody. We will compile them. Send them to Rachel, and then everybody who's been in this webinar today will receive a follow-up email with Rachel's responses, which I'm sure you'll agree is very generous of her. So just to pick one out that I think will have quite a broad appeal to finish with, what would your recommendations be around the use of oils, e.g. seed oils, olive oil? Which oils should we be using?
Yeah, absolutely. That's a good question. There is lots in terms of, I guess it depends what angle you're looking at. From a health perspective, we tend to recommend using things like rapeseed oil and vegetable oil, and some of the like sunflower oil, for example, for cooking. And that's because they have a higher smoking point. So that's the point where they denature. So when you cook with them, say in an oven or things, you'll get that. So all oils are fat sources. They just have different amounts of the different fats in them. So they can be they're probably the best ones to cook with. Olive oil is best to use from a dressings perspective and things like that. Now, the seed oils, and there is quite a lot out there in terms of using seed oils, and it's not actually something I know a huge amount about. So it could be something to add to the list for afterwards. There is quite a lot in terms of, are they really beneficial? Are they going to do more? As far as I'm aware, there isn't any benefits that kind of say you've got to ditch all the others and have that, but I can certainly double check. A lot of it is actually, some of it is around taste and enjoyment once again, and being mindful if you are, mindful of your weight, using them, but actually they can be a great way to boost weight if your appetite's really low. Add a bit of an extra drizzle of oil onto your vegetables or in your potatoes, or, if you've got a tomato-based soup, a drizzle of oil in there, actually a tablespoon of oil is 100 calories. That can then easily be dissolved, I know it's not really dissolved, but mixed into soup, and you don't really notice it and doesn't increase the volume. So they can be quite helpful in lots of different ways. So yeah, I think there's no one you absolutely have to. What I would say is something is solid at room temperature. So, for example, coconut oil, that means it's really high in the less good types of fats. So that's one we would avoid more from a health perspective, from a cholesterol and kind of cardiovascular, so kind of heart aspect, is one that we would say perhaps pop to the side and use it sparingly, perhaps in certain dishes where it tastes, is great from a taste perspective, but not to be done in everyday cooking.
Fantastic. Thank you, Rachel. I'm always amazed at, your ability to jump from one thing to the next, ready to answer any question. Well, thank you so much for your time, and thank you all for dialing in today as well. We've had some wonderful questions. I hope that you have found that session, really informative, helpful, even if it prompts you to, think about things slightly differently, have a conversation with a dietitian perhaps. And yes, I think that we can bring that session to a close. So yeah, thanks all for coming.